Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Venerable.
You too.
Nice to see you.
It's good to see you as well. You all as well.
Yes, welcome to Tuesday night live stream at the Hermitage. And lovely to see so many people already on the chat. Oh, we just lost our channel there. Well, we'll have to pay attention to it here. So, yes, Tuesday night. It's getting to be a little bit lighter out in the evenings. And I've been told by a lot of people in the community in White Salmon that their snow has melted, but ours is still persisting. We still have some, but it's slowly going away. I forgot to tell you this morning. I think I saw like a possum or something.
We have a possum.
Going by your cootie, going right through your
It's
cootie.
quite exciting. Through my cootie.
No, not it didn't go through, but it went right up to the door.
That's really
Your lights
something.
are on, and yeah.
I lived with a Kruba Ajahn, a teacher in Thailand who was known for his loving kindness. His name was Ajahn Tong, and he would always feed the ants after his meal. Like he would take leftover food and give it to these, like just an absurd amount of metta, but animals would wander up to his kuti and just wait. Like we had a turtle that got released on the grounds, like a tortoise, and it walked up to his kuti and just waited in front of his door just for him. And he was known for this, as like he had the most loving kindness of almost anyone I've ever met. It was pretty astounding. So
Oh, that's nice.
I don't, yeah, I don't know if the possum
He
was.
didn't individually feed the ants.
Yeah, he did. Not in, well, maybe a little bit. He has a lot of love. He's an impressive man.
Yeah, that's nice. It's nice stories from Thailand.
Thanks.
Yeah, we don't. But surprisingly, we don't see. It's like bereft of animals here. I don't
Yeah,
see.
not too many.
Occasionally a squirrel.
Yep. Lots of joggers.
So I think the possum was kind of
Uh,
exciting.
do we have sound? Are others hearing? Okay. My dad is saying he might not.
There's no sound.
Oh, maybe it's my dad who doesn't have the sound. All right.
Okay.
All right. Well, Jin, what do we have today to... Well, I have a...
We have one question, but we don't have too much else people have given us.
Yeah, please feel free to ask what comes to mind. We have an open, blank slate today. But the question we do have, if I can ask you, Ajahn,
Sure.
is basically this person went into the difficulty she's been undergoing during the pandemic, which I think many people can relate to, and how she has worked to change some of the conditions that she sees around her, which are unjust or especially difficult, but that there's a lot of pain in this. And she spoke of the vague delusion which one experiences in life, and seeing so many people living lives of distraction and meaninglessness is painful. I'm trying to balance my refuge with the misery I see every day. Should I stop following the news? What more can I do for the world in the pandemic?
Well, you spoke of the vague delusion apparently.
A little bit,
Okay.
but
what were you saying about the vague delusion? I didn't.
I was referencing how there are these examples of great suffering which necessitate us finding a refuge in the Dhamma and in the practice, like the killing fields in Cambodia or the gulags in Soviet Russia. And I referenced some people that moved through these situations untouched, but that we also shouldn't underestimate the suffering that just a normal middle class suburban existence in the US entails as well, and that it's almost it's insidious in its own way because we don't see it happening, but it's more like the core of ourselves gets sort of worn away in this confluence of convenience and comfort, and we lose our sense of purpose. And depression rates in the first world have been compared in studies to the depression rates in some developing nations. And I don't think this would apply in situations where basic needs weren't getting met, and not to glorify poverty, but depression rates in the first world were 6 times as high. And so, yeah, just that we have a great deal of suffering in our own right. So I think maybe that's what she's speaking about in terms of the vague delusion. But
Well,
also,
I mean, and the fact of what you said, I mean, it of course, like having success or being comfortable or not being in poverty or extreme poverty doesn't mean one's not going to suffer. So I think most people know that. Um, there can even be guilt around that, or I should have more suffering. Um, but yeah, I mean that's it's important to know that that's sort of our commonality between all of us is that we all suffer. Um, and I think for me the question about the news is probably the easiest question I can see. Yes, you should stop following the news. That's my own opinion. When I just notice when I'm not watching the news, I'm just a happier person. I've already said that a few times. I don't really see the point in really. I don't see in what we call modern news, for example. I don't see the point in following that at all. I don't even know if you. I mean, you call it news. It's more like just fabrications, or it's really hard to penetrate what's real anymore, based on what other people are trying to say to us. There are probably some organizations that are better than others, but for the most part, we're not really getting the truth, I think, anymore so easily. A lot of opinions, and people think that that's kind of okay, or to appear that something is being said from one side. It just, I don't see an advantage, but I see an advantage in not watching the news, because the mind just doesn't like if anybody can tell me that they feel more peaceful, happy, joyful, concentrated, and that they realize the Dhamma after they watch the news. I mean, I don't see it. I just see it as something that riles people up and brings a lot of negativity. Now, one can apply the Dhamma in terms of that, but I think it's very hard, because the images are kind of telling us what we should or shouldn't think about something, and they're tainted with, I think, whatever the news organization is trying to kind of push as their agenda. Yeah. So anyway, that's my personal take on that aspect. But in terms of seeing so many people living lives of distraction and meaninglessness, it's true. It's and I think that's what the Buddha really talked about is this is the first noble truth. There is suffering, and that's I think important not to let it get you down in terms of it's just a truth. That's a normal truth. It's a fact of life. So we need to kind of enter into that truth as if like, okay, this is what it is to live in this realm. There is dukkha. There's always going to be separation. There's always going to be death. And what can we do about it? Is to really focus on our own minds. So anyway, those are some
good
thoughts. Go ahead.
good thoughts, Ajahn. And I think the restraint around the news is important. I suppose I might take a slightly different tact. I think that like maybe following, staying up to date in certain respects seems valuable. And I know Long Prapasna has recommended kind of finding one issue that you can make a difference in, and really knowing your knowing that issue well, but then taking a decent step back from the other stuff. And I think that's valuable. Yeah, I think being informed in certain ways, but then also just prioritizing the heart, and really, as practitioners, I think that's our duty, is to remember that we also have to take care of our own well-being. And I think there's a middle path somewhere in the middle of that in balance, and I think people have to find that. But just that the sort of I think we do have to take a very critical look at what we need to know to make a difference, and when it starts to affect our mind state. And I'd say the usual state of people, and of myself if I'm not mindful, say, of checking the news compulsively, is not wholesome at all. And that the amount that we actually need to know to make a concrete difference in the world is less than that, and that it does really affect the heart over time. So yeah, and just that we can forget the garden we live in for the vague whispering of a serpent, in the distance. And like we we live lives surrounded by beauty and care and so many blessings, and yet we can think all day about the headline and just forget all of that. And there's a phrase that evil lies in the gaze that sees evil all around it. And I think there's truth to that. Like, appropriate attention doesn't ignore the faults of the world, but you don't fixate on them hour after hour. So, yeah, I think finding a middle path there and taking a big step away from the smartphone, and definitely having at least one day, like the Sabbath day, like an Uposita day, where you once a week where you just don't even go there at all, at the very least. And I think the Buddha was very clear on that. Not on the smartphone thing, but on having a day that's for practice and just for practice.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you can, yeah, you can say, I think you can argue from both ways in terms of what's really helpful, and I think it comes also down to the person. So there are some people who really, it's just not beneficial. Like for myself, I know that it's not helpful to like just see images and watch videos, things around. It has a very strong effect on me, and so I don't find it helpful. There are other people, I guess, who could, really not be touched by hearing events around the world that are quite affecting for others. So I guess it really depends on certain people and what they're getting, and I would acknowledge that it's helpful in terms of, sometimes you want to know where to devote your energy and times in terms of giving, dana, or in particular around these questions this person was talking about, what they've done to help for fighting for justice. And I would definitely not be advocating that people should stop fighting for justice or stop trying to help other people. But oftentimes we're just moving in that direction much more so than the direction of our own minds, and trying to alleviate our own suffering is going to alleviate the suffering in the world. And so, like, when you fight against racism, if you're fighting with a mind of anger, or like, as this person saying, sort of sadness around the misery, I think there's a balance that needs to be had around how much one is capable of putting momentum and strength and energy into fighting against justice, and what we end up doing with our own minds. So it's interesting that when you think about like an enlightened being, if you come from that actual angle of an enlightened being in the world, the benefit that kind of person can do, I think is so much greater than people who don't have that, or don't have Dhamma in their lives, even to that extent. So
I think you're pointing out something really important, Ajahn, because like the last question is, what more can I do for the world in the pandemic? And the paradigm of like helping versus pulling back into oneself isn't correct, because you're right that pulling back, if done appropriately, is a great gift, because you're cultivating the heart and giving these immense resources to people. So it's more like, how can we make the biggest difference through these two modes, and how do you balance both of them? But I think what you're pointing to is like, you see it so clearly in a being who is enlightened or really has practiced well. Like the ripples they send out into the world are not a small thing, and to like place weight on our own practice, I think that's a really valid point.
yeah, and I also want to say, local participation, locally, trying to help those in one's own community is also helpful. Again, I'm not saying not to do the opposite, to also try to care for people who live quite far, or environmental issues, whatever they might be, that are helpful, are very kind things to do. But also, just that local sense of like caring for your neighbor, caring for someone who's who's very close to you, your township.
Feeds the heart more. It's true.
Yeah, but I mean, it actually is a ripple where you can have an effect, just a person to person, rather than sending a check somewhere. which also has an effect, but it just, there's a different quality to it. I think there can be when you're actually caring for someone in your own community. Um, so yeah, so those are just some of the thoughts I have. I don't think there's an absolute right or wrong around um, what people do. I'm sure there's people who can be quite involved and do it in such a way that's incredibly skillful for them. And for each person, I think that needs to be worked out, how people participate, what they end up giving to. I think there's this organization called Give Well, and they're an organization, for example, that tries to figure out the best way to give, like the most efficient, efficacious, like helpful way that people can extend their kindness in terms of their monetary value. So there's organizations like that. There's places that are very interesting around how one can think about helping the world in a particular way.
That's an interesting organization because they found that the effects of giving are logarithmically related, which means that like it's not like you give to a bad organization and it has half the effect of if you give to these really good causes. It's like the good causes have like hundreds of times more impact. So it's a logarithmic curve. So yeah, I mean that's a great organization to point to, Ajahn. He asks, in meditation just now, I had overwhelming feeling of wanting to have a redo of my life. What to do?
Well,
So it's a big one.
yeah, since we don't have a redo button,
We kind of do as
we
Buddhists a little bit.
yeah, but I mean in terms of like actually reliving your past life and getting all those past things worked out. But those memories serve as something that's quite helpful, I think, in terms of informing you of like mistakes, and that's where we learn and how we can develop. But also there's an acknowledgement that I think everybody's. I mean, I've certainly had that in my meditations many times, or just like, oh, if only I could have done that differently or this differently. And but then I get into like, well, and how would that have worked out? And no, that would have been an interesting life, and let me think about that. And so that's can be quite a distraction. But acknowledging that also exists, that feeling of wanting to redo things, and so I think more like that's helpful to actually look at the future and think about how you can use your mistakes and what you've done in your life to start redoing now, to start moving forward in terms of what it is you want to do based on the mistakes that you wanted to redo in your past. So that's just one way I was thinking about it.
No, I think that's true. Yeah, yeah, and just yeah, we can all relate to that, I think. And there's a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya called the conch blower, and the Buddha says, basically, when one reflects on a past deed that one's done that one wasn't proud of, or say a life that you feel some regret over parts of it, one should reflect, that's not good. I regret this, but I can't undo what I have done. And just as a strong conch blower would be heard in all four directions, so one who achieves the liberation of the heart through loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, any limited past deed they've done does not remain there long. So that is to say, the mind developed with loving kindness, these past karmic deeds don't persist. And what I take that to mean is karma, at least in part. I mean, that sort of constant regret that just follows you like a dog hounding you over the years. I mean, that is karma that you're creating and keeping. And loving kindness, the Buddha is very direct about, like for yourself or for all beings, but in this case, perhaps especially for yourself, will help those thoughts dissipate. And he also points in the same sutta to the fact that if one reflects and lets the past drag one's down, then that's a cause for the spirit being dragged down, and one shouldn't get drawn up in that. And I think just thinking about how, yeah, our compassion shapes us into, our suffering shapes us into tools that help us be of use to people and have true compassion. I mean, if we've never been hurt, it's very hard to have compassion for others, you know? So, yeah.
And just as a hindrance, I mean, regret is something that one can get quite stuck in, you know, sort of worry and flurry and concern about what we've done and who we've harmed,
Yeah.
and so that can be also something that gets us quite stuck. And so, I mean, that's where that metta has a potential to bring us out of that. But yeah, that the regret is something I think that many people feel, and it is a helpful sort of emotion to have, because in one aspect that you actually, you know, as you touched upon, Venerable Nisabho, the idea that we do have a sense of what's right and wrong and what we should and shouldn't be doing, and if we don't have that, then we're in trouble. There's something quite big that we're missing in life, because we don't you can't really go forward with being a skillful human being without a sense of right and wrong. But then there's the other end of that, which is just getting stuck in regret and remorse, and just feeling like one can't move on. And this is why we're taught so much to really, by the Buddha, really pay attention to our actions, because, you know, for somebody who is like, you know, let's say, for example, murdered people or something, there can be great difficulties. You know, you've harmed people to certain extents, and it's just very difficult to get one's mind out of that kind of dukkha and negativity. So we have to watch what we're doing, but also be careful about not sort of like the movement also towards guilt, and just being stuck in these emotions when they're unhelpful. I see there's some other
Hello, Venerable Dhammadippa. Yes.
and we have some other. There's another thing about the news. That was an interesting comment.
Let's see.
The news is a bad friend.
Ah, yes.
Um,
Questions
so
are
that's
welcome,
good.
people.
Yeah.
Colleen, I believe Ajahn Sudanto once referred to the news as a bad friend. I think this often when I find myself checking news too much.
Yeah.
And yeah, just to reflect on the regret around one's life, like, I just think the Dhamma, like, it never, there's always a pure movement forward. Like, there's always a path, you know? And yeah, I mean, it's, yeah, it's banal to say almost because it's so, you know, cliche, but whatever we've been through can be a cause for what we are meant to move into, I think, or can move into. So, yeah.
But it's very powerful. I mean, that sense of regret. I mean, I think most of our listeners could understand that quite easily. So it's so common, and it's something we work with. But it is interesting, like in meditation, when you're working with that, you know, as a hindrance, as a hindrance is something that hinders you, doesn't allow you to move forward. And for me, it's like how that one comes up is, it's like, it's just kind of, it comes over you. It feels like shackles, like someone's holding me down, not allowing me to really move on from this kind of sort of regurgitating thoughts of like, I did wrong, I was wrong, I shouldn't have done that, or, you know, and it's, you know, it's true, it's a helpful lesson to know that, but then when it gets us stuck, I mean, I'm sure many of us either confront it ourselves or other people when others come to us and say like, I can't get over this thing, and in our own minds we know, like, I mean, it's not that bad, or, you know, I mean, sometimes it is that bad, but when it isn't, you know, you're kind of, wow, this person's really stuck. They really can't move on from this thing that they've done, and we want to help them, but the only way I think to help is just in that kind of situation is to really regard that this is what it is. It's just a hindrance. It's something that we are just going to be stuck in like a loop around, and that's what regret often feels like. It's like a loop. For myself, and it's just important to, you know, how to come back to, again, as we talk about the simplicity of the practice, is just like, what are we experiencing right now? It's just dukkha. You know, the regret is in the body. It's like a heavy, depressing kind of negative energy, and again, I think we can learn from regret, but then it's holding you down from not being able to be in the present moment, then you're in trouble.
Well, and your analogy of feeling like you're in chains is apt. Like, so the Buddha compared the different hindrances to different situations, and sensual desire is, oh no, what's sensual desire? Uh,
Well, there's the
Anger
different.
is a sickness.
Mhm.
Sorry, Arjun.
No, I was thinking about the water, the boiling water as
Okay,
well.
no, those are the bowl, yeah, filled with colored dye. Anger is a sickness. The third hindrance of tinamita or sloth and torpor is like being stuck in a dungeon. The
Right.
fourth of restlessness and remorse, which is what we're talking about. And I think it's very interesting that those two are paired. Restlessness and remorse. It's almost like we can't stay calm because if we were still, then our mind would be forced to look at what we regret. So it has to keep moving. And the word for it's uttacha kukucha, which means like hovering over. So it's this sort of hovering, and the Buddha compares that to being enslaved. So
Mm.
exactly what you're saying, Ajahn, with like the loop and the being in shackles. I mean, that's exactly the analogy the Buddha gives. Um, and I find a really helpful thing for me is really imagining sitting down across the table from a good friend and telling them what you would like what you are worried about, and just really imagining their reaction. And almost every time, the friend in your mind is going to be like, it's not a big deal, like what are you saying, because we're so much harder on ourselves than we would ever be to another. And so I think really like creating that visualization and bringing in the loving kindness of another person is important, because then we can sort of get a bit of perspective and step out. And then the Jacob's asking about the hindrance of indecision, which is the fifth hindrance, and the Buddha compares that to taking a journey through a uninhabited area frequented by thieves. So one doesn't know if one will reach the end. And I think that one's a pretty brutal one as well for modern people. What are your thoughts on indecision, Ajahn?
I don't know.
Nice
I think
Buddhist
it's
joke.
interesting the fifth hindrance. I mean, the fifth hindrance often comes out around the path. You're doubting the path, doubting like what it is you're doing and whether you're doing the right thing and the wrong thing, or should be doing something different. And it's like a very unsettling experience, because it's just like basically there isn't an end. And even the degree that with that hindrance, it doesn't seem like there is. It's sort of like you said, it's like being lost in the woods, and you just can't find your way through. Um, and what's interesting, I think, for myself around that hindrance is just the acknowledgement of that. To know this is indecision, this is doubt. This is like doubt. It's not. There isn't actually an end. I'm not going to find an end. I'm not going to find any way out of this. Um, and the belief I'm projecting is that if I just figure out the answers to these questions I have, then I will be okay. I'll be fine. I won't be in doubt anymore. And I think that's unfortunately not the right answer. The right answer is give it up, because it's not going anywhere. There isn't actually an end to the answering, because the whole impetus of the hindrance is that it's just sending us on an unlimited, unmarked course through,
Mm.
no finding, not being able to find oneself at all, not being able to find any ground, and just to keep going. So I think in terms of the nature of indecision is its nature is not to have any end. And as long as we not acknowledge that, then we can say, oh, okay, this is, I don't necessarily have to know where this is coming from, why I'm thinking this, what my indecision is about, and we just need to know that this is what it is. And then, of course, comes the question, well, then how do I decide? And I think one does need to rely on, if there is a decision to be made, and you can't just say, well, this is just doubt coming up. I just need to know it as doubt and then let it go. But when you have to make a decision, then really it's the fact is decisions are just they are what they are. You make one, and then you see, did it work out or did it not work out? And we only have our intuition to understand that. We can see the skillfulness of it, the harm one decision will have over the other. But whether to know that whether something was the right decision or not is really what the outcomes were. What actually happened. Again, if you're deciding something that's not necessarily like obvious that one side is unskillful and the other is not. So I just think that's how I tend to try to work with it. I don't know if you're.
I know similar ones, and this one also is really debilitating for me. Recently, I discovered that if I pretend that Longpor Pasno is sitting next to me, and I ask what he would do, he usually has a pretty sharp answer for me. So that cuts things right to the core continually. So I think if you got a teacher like that, Longpor Pasno is a good one. Then he'll tell you what to do, kind of. So honestly though, imagining and bringing him to mind or some teacher, I do find very helpful in deciding, and then paying attention to the state of mind. I mean, that's also the Buddha said the antidote for the hindrance of doubt was seeing bright states as bright states and dark states as dark states. And I think what he's pointing to is instead of looking at the decision, maybe one can look at the state of mind that is doubting, and almost as if we're in that wagon caravan through the uninhabited land, and or you're lost in the forest, and instead of continuing to wander, you just sit down where you are, and and then I think the breath is a good go-to as well until things calm down, because also the order of the four noble truths, I mean, you have the cessation of suffering, like peace, and then you have the path out of cessation, or the path to cessation, the Noble Eightfold Path. And I think that order is interesting because for me, it's sometimes only from that place of calm do you see the path out. And obviously these truths, like these different duties associated with the truths, work at different points and in different orders and feed back into one another. But for me, until the doubt has cleared up, it's just impossible to kind of make a decision. So sometimes waiting for that moment of the third noble truth, like that moment of peace, and then contemplating from there is much more helpful for me personally.
Yeah, I was thinking about how, I mean, we keep relating to a sense of like the purpose of what we're doing. It's to settle the mind, to be peaceful, and as you were talking about, make a time to make a decision, and is not when one is confused or excited. The mind is moving, and it's interesting though how easy it is to really engage in sort of self-sabotaging, and one of the things I've just been reflecting on this week and in my own meditation practice is a sense of really questioning, like, what, how is it that it's so easy to not make the right decision that would help me in whatever it is that I want to do in terms of like pacifying the mind and coming to wisdom and understanding and clarity, and that the choice is so obvious sometimes, but then I won't always make that correct choice, that I'll often sabotage whatever it is because there's some particular desire I want to meet, or some aversion I kind of go with, and it's unfortunate because it's like, wow, like, why, if the path is so clear, then why is there any time that one makes a wrong decision, or one makes a movement of mind that isn't helpful, and even one that we know isn't clear or is actually unskillful, detrimental to our path. And I kind of think that mostly what we have these habits that we engage in all the time around just the movements of our minds, these intentions, the cetana, and basically if we kind of examine like what it is that's motivating us, it's not, again, it can be unskillfulness, it can be desire, aversion, and it's just more or less as I've developed as a monk, I think it's tending to like which like to tune in, like a radio station to like the right voice, because if I'm it's easy, you know, like if you're thinking about tuning a radio, you know, you might pick the voice that you particularly like or you're accustomed to, or that's easy for you to listen to. But really, like, we all have these voices in ourselves that are sort of voices of wisdom. You know, I'm sure many of you have heard about like how Dhamma teachers will, like Ajahn Jeff, for example, talk about committee members. There's other people that have different references to this. You have like just different voices in your head, and it's not like just one or the other, or you're in a bad mood at one point and you're not. There's other prominent what appears to be beings that are actually coming through, and we don't want to always listen to them. You know, we want to listen to, for example, the greedy one at one point, or the one that says, oh no, it's best to be aversive in this and just get away as quickly as possible, or the fearful one, and we don't accentuate sometimes the voices of wisdom that are helpful in a situation. And so I think what's sometimes helpful is actually to really question yourself. What's the right thing to do here? What's the voice that I'm missing? Is there a voice of wisdom within me that I actually already know what to do in a particular situation? You know, so for example, I think many people, just talking from my own experience in meditating, you have a particular movement that your mind is making towards a thought world, and there's a vague sense before that, oh, no, I shouldn't go there, or it's best not to move in this direction, and then it still happens. So why does that happen? If I did actually have an idea and I knew that I shouldn't move in that direction, and I think it's often because we're just relying on that other voice of desire, or whatever it is that we want to, and we're not kind of listening to the other voice of wisdom. And so I've just been reflecting on that. It is really about like how we talk to ourselves, how we listen to ourselves, you know, how well we're tuned in to what it is that is the skillful voices within us. And it is pretty easy to know what the right thing is to do in certain situations. You just can ask yourself, no, I think this is, I know, like for example, the refrigerator, you know, and people living at home a lot more now. Like, you know, the refrigerator is not really a place that's gonna release one from dukkha, and you know, there's probably just a few times that you need to go to the refrigerator a day. But for other people, it's sort of like, oh, you know, I wonder what's in the refrigerator, or what, you know, and I know one wise person put up a sign on the refrigerator. It was just simply, it's not in here, you know, salvation, nibbana, whatever you want to say. It's not in here. And so we need to eat, of course, but what is it that we're not listening to, that we go and we go to the refrigerator like 10 times a day or something like that? And I think it's just important to kind of tune into that voice as, no, that's not going to be helpful right now, and I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to have this conversation with that person right now. It's not the right timing. Or I do want to, you know, say it, just say it to them, but it's not going to be helpful. It's going to be upsetting to them, upsetting to me. There's another way I can say it, or another time or place. So when we develop this kind of voice of wisdom within us, and there can be multiple voices of wisdom, then we have the potential to actually skillfully tune into that, respond to it, know that it's there, and rely on it, rather than kind of maybe our usual habits or ways that we tune in that are unskillful. So I would encourage people to kind of ask yourselves when there is a doubt, or there is some kind of nagging push to do something that you have maybe that's not so helpful for me to do. Just ask yourself that, like, well, what is the most helpful thing to do right now? And the answer is usually there. And sometimes it's not even easy to take that answer. Oh, I don't want to do that. You know, I don't want to meditate right now. Or you know, even with people, sometimes it's like doing something kind for another person. Oh, I don't want to do that right now, which is amazing. To think that. So I've just been kind of experimenting with this more and more, and trying to tune into that voice. But in order to do that, I really need to ask myself that question. You know, what's the most skillful thing to do right now? What's the better thing? What do I have a real sense of? And then there's that intuition that comes up. Oh yeah, I actually do know. It can be surprising too. Well, it's sort of one thing I've been turning over and trying to bring up.
It's a good thing to turn over.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think the what you're saying around the constant, say, thinking of the refrigerator or buying into the voices we know aren't right. I mean, for Stodgen Amaro, I've mentioned this before, but he says that you can hear the tone of voice of, the Buddha metaphorically and Mara, which is the Buddhist personification of evil, speaking in our heads. So if you have a certain line of thinking, like listen to the tone of it, and it's true. Some lines of thinking really do have kind of an oily feel to them, and that's Mara's voice, and then the Buddha's voice tends to be very calm, even if it's telling you to do something urgent, like get out now. Um, and I've found that looking to the tone of voice is very, very helpful. But also around what you're saying with like the constant return to these previous ruts of being, I think it's almost like I know before I ordained, before I found this path, I had nowhere really worthy to go. So like a river that's hit kind of a dam, it kind of overflew the banks and spread out in all these little rivulets to the refrigerator, to this movie, to binging on Netflix, to this and that. And I couldn't restrain it because we have this intention, this need for fulfillment and joy and purpose. And if there's no real outlet for that, it will dissipate and move in directions unworthy of it. So I think, simultaneously, yes, we're restraining, but we're also developing the path because for me, it was as if suddenly and for the first time I found a purpose worthy of my heart and of my life. And those constant inclinations to do things that were below me, to constantly reach out to these trifling and coarse and fleeting desires, like they were less compelling because finally there was something worth giving myself to completely. And it's as if that floodgate opened and suddenly the water didn't need to overflow into these rivulets anymore. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well. Like maybe you're looking for distraction because, or maybe one looks for distraction because one isn't, one has a vague sense that one isn't doing, living a life worthy of one, like that one has more potential than one is using, and to pay attention to that voice as well, and not if it's the unwholesome or overly self-critical voice saying that, but if it's coming from a deep place and it comes up in meditation and I need to do better, and like there is something more worthy of me, or dedicating to myself to this path, or meditating a little bit more. I know for me there really were clear visions of steps on this path where, as a layperson, I heard of someone who was meditating an hour and a half a day, and I was like, I really want to try to do that. And I didn't succeed all the time, but certainly that direction was fulfilling in a way that others weren't, and uh, it helped mitigate the sensual desire and the constant falling into ruts. It's as if the wagon has a path, so it doesn't need to always fall into the ditch on either side or something. So yeah, just restraining is important, but also developing this path and at the same time.
Yeah, the important thing is the more that we um, figure out how to follow those sort of skillful qualities, the sense of like kind of we figure out, oh, the right thing to do, and then there's a sense of like, oh yeah, I'm really happy I did that,
Mm.
or there's a fulfillment that occurs out of that, and then actually spurns us on into doing it again and again and again until we kind of build up this massive pile of skillful actions, and that that I think it can be hard to get that momentum because it's not always so clear. We do have these mix of desires, and they're often competing. But when we do, then there's this kind of like momentum that starts to build, and as you were talking about, a rut that gets us out of those ruts, and moves us in directions that are quite helpful. So I also want to say that I think is the sense of satta, or faith,
Mm.
that develops, and is many of you have heard that another word for faith, satta, is confidence, And to me, I always bring that up around faith, because faith sometimes seems like it's not that. It's more like this blind faith or something you get just out of believing. But no, it's your sense that, oh, this is actually working. The Buddha is suggesting to follow the path in this particular way, and I'm doing it. And then he says, yeah, so you should investigate. Is it actually working? And then you see, oh, it does work. And sometimes it doesn't. So, oh, how am I following this wrong, in the wrong way, or picking it up in the wrong way? And so, yeah, so it's really, I think that's one of the most helpful things, is there's this sort of like cheering committee behind you, urging you on towards what's good, towards being kind to others. And that's the sort of the Buddha's blessings that we are sort of riding on his coattails, so to speak.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. So, wow, goes by fast. It is already 7:15.
That inner cheering committee has gotten louder.
Yeah.
We can all serve as that for each other.
Yeah. And, just try to work with some of those good, kind voices within that you might not hear so readily. It's a good endeavor to try to tune into those.
Agree.
So the next live stream will be with Venerable Nisabho on Friday, and at 7:30.
7 a.m.
Oh, 7 a.m.
7 a.m.
Yeah. So if you're at 7:30, then you're going to be too late, or you'll move in.
Very end.
You'll miss a lot of it. So yes, try to be there if you're interested, and I won't be there, but I'll be hopefully around on Tuesday. We were joking that we already have some of the live streams already, the little pinned out, the thumbnails.
Oh yeah.
Produced, and I said, well, you never know, might have to cross me out or something. We'll see if we both survive. Okay, be well. Have a good week for me, and a good few days until you see Venerable Nisabho.
It's been a pleasure, Ajahn.
Yeah.
Everyone.